Stowaway is a sci-fi film that was just released on Netflix a couple of days ago, and it was pretty dope. The film revolves around a group of scientists on a mission to Mars who come to discover a, you guessed it, stowaway on board. The film reminded me a lot of the film that was released in 2007 called Sunshine, which also happens to be one of my favourite films ever made. That film follows a group of scientists on a space mission who, when everything doesn't go according to plan, are forced into some pretty tough situations where their humanity is tested. While Sunshine was very dark in tone and blended elements of psychological horror and even slasher film, Stowaway is a very understated movie to say the least, and that's what I loved about it. The film could have relied on melodrama or shock value for its dramatic weight, but the film never went that route. Instead, the film built up its characters and their situation very patiently and effectively and made you sympathetic to their decisions and actions as the stakes got higher. The film is directed in a way that makes you feel like one of the characters. For example, during the opening of the film in which we are introduced to the crew taking off for their mission, it is pretty much entirely shot in the interior of the shuttle's cockpit, using wide exterior shots of space minimally, and uses mostly close-ups on the characters, putting their reactions on full display. These things, mixed with the immersive sound design and lack of music, makes you feel as though you are experiencing the takeoff firsthand with these characters, rather than observing from a distance, which is a mistake a lot of other space travel movies make. So in other words, director Joe Penner sacrificed what would have otherwise been superficial spectacle, such as wide-angle shots of space or epic music, for immersion, which ultimately benefited the film. Speaking of the film's score, I love the way music was used in the film. It starts off very ambient and atmospheric, and as the film stakes become progressively higher, it becomes a lot more epic and dynamic, as a lot more orchestral elements are gradually introduced. I also liked how, during the first act, there are a lot of tracking shots of the crew doing mundane day-to-day tasks, which created a great sense of the ship's layout as well as the interworkings of the crew. The film also used dialogue very effectively. Whenever the characters were conversing during the first act, you learn a lot of important details about their personalities, a lot of which come into play as the plot progresses. The character that I thought was the most fascinating was Anna Kendrick's character. During the film's second act, she explains her backstory, which at first seems cliched, especially in this type of film, but without spoiling anything, takes an interesting and subversive turn, which plays an important role in the film's resolution. The performances were also all around great. I'll pretty much watch anything starring Toni Collett, considering she keeps hitting home runs with everything she's been starring in lately. Her performance in this film, like the rest of the cast, was nuanced and subtle. There is a scene that stood out to me personally, which involved her arms being bandaged after experiencing severe bruising. Her performance in the scene is so understated and authentic that you can almost feel the pain that the character is enduring. One of the most impressive things about this film for me personally was with how the characters responded to their situation. In a lot of movies where characters are put into tough moral situations, there is a cliche in which characters turn cartoonishly evil or cold, and for some films, depending on the genre, style and tone, that works, but in this film you really see how the difficult situation they are having to contend with is tearing them apart, and what lengths the characters will go to salvage their own humanity. Even when the characters disagree with what is right, and ultimately act on these disagreements, you as the audience still can't help but empathise with the characters' actions, given the difficult scenario they are facing. That sort of nuance isn't easy to write or direct, and the film has the right cast to make it work. My only real complaint is that there's a couple of scenes where the green screen looks kind of cheap, which is odd considering the rest of the film is technically so stunning. I've noticed that this film, while having an overall positive critical response, isn't getting the love that I think it deserves. The main complaint seems to be the pacing issues, quote unquote, which is weird to me, because this is probably the most well-paced movie I've seen in a long time. I feel like people constantly conflate movies that are more deliberately paced and immersive with being boring and uneventful, which in my opinion are completely different things. Remember, slow pacing and bad pacing aren't the same thing. All in all, I was surprised with how much I enjoyed this film. It was refreshing, engaging, atmospheric, and surprisingly moving. If I have to rate it, I'd probably rate it a solid 8 out of 10, maybe higher upon a rewatch. Till next time!